You'll never own a house like your brother, my parents said. Then I paid 5.2 mil worth cash before he could. My name is Kira Sokolova, and this is the story of how I went from being the disappointment daughter to writing a check that made my entire family go silent. You'll never own a house like your brother, my parents said at dinner one night, their voices dripping with casual dismissal. 5 years later, I walked into the exclusive Riverside estate they'd been coveting for him and paid $5.2 million in cash before my golden boy brother could even get his loan approved. But this story isn't really about money. It's about something far more valuable that they tried to take from me. Have you ever been invisible in your own family? Let me back up. I need you to understand where this started, because revenge without context is just cruelty. And what I did was justice. I grew up in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, in a tight-knit Russian immigrant family, where success was measured in three things: marriage, money, and making your parents proud. My brother Dmitri was born to excel at all three. Handsome, charismatic, with that effortless charm that made elderly neighbors slip him money and young women write their numbers on napkins. He was studying finance at NYU, dating a lawyer's daughter, and, according to my mother, destined for greatness. I was the other child, the one they introduced with a slight hesitation. This is Kira, our daughter. She's very independent. Independent was code for disappointing. I wasn't married at 25. I didn't have a prestigious job title they could brag about at the Russian Orthodox Church. I was working as a junior software developer for a startup that made educational apps, pulling 70-hour weeks in a cramped office in Queens, and living in a studio apartment with a bathroom so small I had to sit sideways on the toilet. But I loved my work. I loved the logic of code, the way you could build something from nothing, the puzzle-solving aspect that made my brain light up at 3 in the morning. My coworkers thought I was brilliant. My boss kept promoting me. I was learning machine learning and AI integration when most people still thought artificial intelligence was science fiction. My parents thought I was wasting my time. "When are you going to find a real job?" my father would ask, as if my salary wasn't real. "When are you going to meet someone?" My mother would sigh as if my value was determined by whose last name I took. The breaking point came at Dimitri's 27th birthday party. My parents had rented out the back room of a Georgian restaurant, invited everyone from the neighborhood, and spent the entire evening talking about how Dmitri had just been promoted to associate at his investment firm. He stood there in his tailored suit, accepting congratulations like a prince at court, while I sat at the corner table in my Target dress, nursing a glass of wine and trying to be invisible. That's when my father made the announcement. "We have exciting news," he said, tapping his glass with a fork until the room went quiet. "Anna and I have decided to help Dmitri buy his first property. We've been saving for years, and we believe it's time to invest in his future." The room erupted in applause. My mother beamed. Dmitri looked appropriately humble, giving a speech about family and gratitude and building generational wealth. I sat there feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach. After the party, I found my mother in the kitchen, packing up leftover khachapuri. "Mama," I said quietly, "I've been saving too. I was going to ask if you might consider helping me with a down payment. Nothing big, just enough to get into a one-bedroom, maybe in Astoria." She cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Kira, be realistic. You'll never own a house like your brother. He has a stable career, a future wife, a real-life plan. You're still playing with computers." She said computers the way someone might say mud pies. Besides, why would a single woman need a house? What you need is a husband. I stood there in that kitchen, surrounded by the smell of baked bread and disappointment, and something inside me crystallized. Not anger exactly, something colder, something more useful. Clarity. That night, I went home to my shoebox apartment and made a decision. I wasn't going to argue or beg or try to prove my worth to people who had already decided I had none. I was going to become undeniable. I started working differently. Not harder. I was already working hard, but smarter. I began documenting every algorithm I improved, every efficiency I created, every problem I solved. I started networking, not at family gatherings where I was invisible, but at tech conferences where people actually listened. I met a woman named Sarah Chen at a machine learning symposium who was developing predictive AI for real estate development. We talked for 4 hours about pattern recognition and market forecasting. 3 months later, she offered me a position at her company. The salary was triple what I was making. The equity package was substantial. The work was cutting-edge AI integration for property development and urban planning, using machine learning to predict gentrification patterns, property value fluctuations, and investment opportunities before they became obvious to traditional markets. I didn't tell my family about the new job. When they asked how work was going, I said, fine, and changed the subject. Let them think I was still wasting my time with educational apps. Meanwhile, Dimitri's house hunt had begun. My parents drove him around to open houses every weekend, offering advice and financial backing. They'd settled on a budget of $1.8 million for a brownstone in Park Slope. Something with good bones, close to the subway, perfect for the family he'd eventually start with his lawyer girlfriend, Natasha. I watched this unfold from the sidelines, saying nothing, while I poured myself into my work. Sarah's company was exploding. Our AI was predicting market movements with terrifying accuracy. Developers and investment firms were paying us ridiculous amounts of money for access to our forecasting models. My equity was vesting, my salary increased again. And then I started investing. Not randomly, using our own AI to identify undervalued properties in emerging neighborhoods. I bought my first investment property in Bushwick before the neighborhood transformed. Sold it 18 months later for double what I paid. Bought 2 more in Sunset Park, then a small commercial building in Long Island City. I lived like a monk. My apartment was still tiny. I drove a 12-year-old Honda. I wore the same rotation of clothes from Target and Uniqlo. Every dollar I didn't need for survival went into investments that my family knew nothing about. 2 years after that birthday party, I was a millionaire on paper, not liquid cash. Most of my wealth was tied up in property and equity, but real wealth, the kind that compounded, the kind that built empires. My family had no idea. They were too busy planning Dimitri's wedding. The engagement had been a massive production at the Brighton Beach Boardwalk, complete with a flash mob and a photographer who charged more than my first car. Natasha's ring cost $40,000. I knew because my mother told everyone who would listen. The wedding was scheduled for the following spring at some estate in Connecticut. I was asked to be a bridesmaid, not the maid of honor. That honor went to Natasha's sister, but one of 6 matching background characters in an eggplant-colored dress that cost $400 and made me look like a depressed Victorian ghost. The final insult came at the engagement party. Dimitri pulled me aside, his arm around my shoulder in that brotherly way that might have felt affectionate if it wasn't so condescending. "I'm glad you're here, Kira," he said. "I know you and I have different paths, different kinds of success. But I want you to know that when Natasha and I get settled in our house, you're always welcome to visit. Maybe babysit the kids someday. I think you'd be good with children." He meant it as kindness, as generosity, as if offering me a role in his life was the greatest gift he could give. That's when I knew exactly what I was going to do. The property appeared on my radar 3 months before the wedding. Our AI flagged it as an emerging opportunity, a riverside estate in Scarborough, just north of the city, that had been owned by an elderly couple who'd recently moved to Florida. The house was a masterpiece, 6,000 square feet, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson, a chef's kitchen with marble countertops, 4 bedrooms each with ensuite bathrooms, a library with built-in shelves, a home theater, a wine cellar, and grounds that included mature trees and a private dock. It was listed at $4.8 million, which our AI suggested was undervalued given the neighborhood's trajectory and the property's unique features. It was also, and this was the beautiful part, the exact house my parents had shown Dmitri 6 months earlier as inspiration for what he might own someday. They'd walked through it during an open house, taken photos, talked about how it was too expensive now, but maybe in 5 or 10 years, after Dimitri's career really took off, after he'd saved more. It was their dream house, not Dimitri's. He didn't care that much about real estate beyond having something impressive to show clients. But my parents had been obsessed. My mother had described every room to her friends at church. My father had mentioned it at family dinners at least a dozen times. I contacted the seller's agent on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, I toured the property with Sarah, who agreed it was an excellent investment even beyond the personal satisfaction. By Wednesday, I'd arranged financing, though I wouldn't need it. By Thursday, I'd made an all-cash offer of $5.2 million, well above asking price, with a 10-day closing period and no contingencies. The seller accepted immediately. I didn't tell anyone. I went to the wedding dress, fitting with my fellow bridesmaids, smiled in photos, attended the rehearsal dinner at an overpriced Italian restaurant in Manhattan. I listened to my father give a speech about how proud he was of his son, how Dmitri represented everything good about the American dream, how he'd succeeded through hard work and family values. No one mentioned me. I wasn't part of that narrative. The closing was scheduled for 3 days after the wedding. I'd timed it deliberately. The wedding itself was everything a Russian-American wedding should be: excessive, emotional, and exhausting. 300 guests, a 10-piece band, vodka flowing like water, and enough food to feed a small army. I wore my eggplant dress and stood in the reception line and accepted comments from distant relatives about how I should be next, about how my biological clock was ticking, about how Dmitri had done so well for himself. During dinner, my father gave another speech. This one was about legacy, about building something permanent, about how Dmitri was carrying forward the family name with strength and purpose. He mentioned the house they'd helped Dmitri secure, the Park Slope brownstone, which Dmitri was set to close on in 6 weeks once his mortgage was approved. "To my son," my father said, raising his glass, "who has made us prouder than words can say." Everyone drank. I smiled and clapped and felt nothing but that cold clarity I discovered in my mother's kitchen 2 years earlier. After the wedding, after the honeymoon, after Dmitri and Natasha had settled back into their temporary rental apartment, I sent a message to the family group chat. It was a Sunday afternoon. I knew they'd all be together at my parents' house for dinner. The message said, "Can everyone meet me next Saturday at 2 p.m.? I have something to show you. Here's the address." And I dropped a pin to the Scarborough estate. The responses came quickly. My mother: "What is this? Why are we meeting at this address?" My father: "Kira, we have plans. What is this about?" Dmitri: "Is this some kind of joke? That's the house on the river." I responded with one line: "Just be there. It's important." That week was the longest of my life. Not from anxiety. I was past anxiety, but from anticipation. I'd spent 3 years building toward this moment, and now I was going to watch it unfold. Saturday came cold and clear. I arrived at the house an hour early, unlocked the door with my new keys, and walked through the rooms one more time. The furniture I'd ordered had been delivered and arranged. The kitchen was stocked. The art I'd selected was hung on the walls. Every detail was perfect. My family arrived together, parking their cars in the circular driveway with confused expressions. I opened the door before they could knock. "Welcome," I said simply. My mother looked past me, her eyes widening as she recognized the interior from that open house months ago. "Kira, what are we doing here? Does your company have a meeting here? Did you get a job with the owners?" "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They filed in slowly. My parents, Dmitri, Natasha, even my Aunt Marina, who tagged along for reasons unknown. They stood in the foyer with its vaulted ceiling and chandelier, looking around with the kind of awe people reserve for museums. "I don't understand," my father said. "Why are we here?" I walked to the center of the room. standing beneath the chandelier where the light fell perfectly. I'd practiced this moment in my head 100 times, but now that it was here, I felt strangely calm. "This is my house," I said quietly. "I bought it last week, paid cash. It's mine." The silence that followed was absolute. Not confused silence. This was the silence of a record scratch, of a reality suddenly tilting sideways. "What?" My mother's voice was barely a whisper. "I bought this house," I repeated, looking directly at my father. "The one you said was too expensive. The one you told Dmitri he might own someday. I paid $5.2 million in cash. It closed 3 days after Dmitri's wedding." Dmitri's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. You work for a startup. You live in a studio apartment. You drive a car from 2010. "I did work for a startup," I interrupted. Past tense. Now I'm VP of development at a machine learning company that does AI-driven property analysis. I've been there for 3 years. My salary is enough to make you uncomfortable, and my equity is worth more than you'll make in a decade. I paused, letting that sink in. "And that studio apartment? I own the building. Bought it 2 years ago as an investment property." My mother grabbed the back of a chair. "You've been lying to us?" "No," I said calmly. "I've been private. There's a difference. You never asked about my career beyond whether it was real. You never asked about my finances beyond assuming I had none. You never asked about my life because you were too busy celebrating his." I gestured to Dmitri, who looked like he'd been slapped. "This isn't about money," I continued, my voice steady. "This is about respect, about being seen, about watching my own family treat me like a disappointment while I was quietly building something you couldn't imagine. Do you know what it feels like to be invisible to the people who are supposed to love you? To be the punchline, the cautionary tale, the one who'll never measure up." My father's face had gone red. "We supported you. We fed you, raised you." "You raised me," I agreed. "And then you decided I wasn't worth investing in. Not with money. I didn't need your money. With belief, with pride, with the benefit of the doubt. You gave all of that to Dmitri because he fit your definition of success, and you gave me nothing but dismissal. We helped Dmitri because he was responsible," my mother said, her voice shaking. "He had a plan, a fiancé, a stable career. And I had none of that, so I was worthless?" I shook my head. I had a plan. I was building something revolutionary. I was making moves that will define my industry for the next 20 years. But you couldn't see it, because it didn't look like what you expected success to look like. I walked to the window overlooking the river. The afternoon light sparkled on the water. "I bought this house for a few reasons," I said, not turning around. "First, because it's a smart investment in an appreciating market. Second, because I've earned the right to live somewhere beautiful. And third, because I wanted you to understand something very clearly." Now I turn to face them. "I don't need your approval. I don't need your financial support. I don't need you to believe in me. I already won." Dmitri found his voice. "This is vindictive. You did this to hurt us." "Did I?" I met his eyes. "Or did I simply succeed on my own terms while you were busy being the golden child? Tell me, Dmitri, how much of your down payment came from our parents? How much of your career was built on Dad's connections at the firm? How much of your life has been cushioned by people who believed in you before you'd proven anything?" He didn't answer. "I built everything myself," I said quietly. "Every dollar, every opportunity, every achievement. No one handed me anything. No one opened doors. I kicked them down. And you know what the funny part is? I would have shared it with you, all of it, if you'd ever once asked about my life like you cared about the answer." My mother was crying now. "We did care. We do care." "You care now," I said. "Now that I'm undeniable. Now that I'm living proof that you were wrong about me." But where was that care when I was working? 70-hour weeks in Queens? Where was it when I asked for help with a down payment and got told I'd never own a house like my brother? I smiled without humor. Well, you were right about one thing. I didn't own a house like Dimitri. I own a house he could never afford. The cruelty of that line hung in the air. I saw Natasha's hand slip into Dimitri's, saw my father's jaw clench, saw my Aunt Marina look away uncomfortably. I'm not trying to destroy you, I said, my voice softening slightly. I'm trying to make you see me. Really see me. Not as the disappointment daughter or the spinster or the weird one with computers. As someone who had value all along. Someone who deserved your faith. My father spoke then, his voice hoarse. What do you want from us, Kira? It was a good question. What did I want? Revenge had brought me here, but revenge was proving to be emptier than I'd expected. Standing in my beautiful house, watching my family struggle with their own misconceptions, I realized the victory was hollow if this was where it ended. I want you to understand what you did, I said finally. I want you to sit with the knowledge that you had 2 children, and you chose to believe in only one. I want you to think about what that cost. Not me, because I'm fine. But you. You missed everything. Every milestone, every achievement, every moment when I was becoming someone extraordinary. You missed all of it, because you decided before I even started that I wasn't worth watching. I walked to the door and opened it. I'm not cutting you out of my life. I'm not disowning you or taking some dramatic stand. But I am establishing something very clear. I don't need you. If you want to be part of my life going forward, it has to be on equal terms. No more dismissal. No more comparing me to Dimitri. No more acting like my success is surprising or my choices are questionable. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm demanding basic respect. They filed out slowly, stunned and silent. Dimitri paused at the door. I didn't know, he said quietly. I didn't know they made you feel. I didn't know. You didn't ask, I replied. Not angry anymore, just honest. He nodded and left. I stood in the doorway and watched them drive away, 4 cars disappearing down the tree-lined road. Then I closed the door, locked it, and walked through my house, my beautiful, expensive, hard-earned house, and felt the weight of 3 years finally lift. The aftermath was messy. My mother called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that ranged from defensive to apologetic. My father sent a stiff email acknowledging that perhaps we could have been more supportive. Dimitri tried to engage me in conversation about our childhood, about patterns he was now seeing clearly, about his own complicity in my invisibility. I responded to all of it with measured calm. I had dinners with them on my terms, at restaurants I chose. I listened to their apologies and accepted some while, recognizing that others were more about their discomfort than my healing. I set boundaries. I enforced them. Slowly, carefully, we built something new. Not the relationship we'd had, that was dead and not worth resurrecting, but something more honest. My mother started asking about my work and actually listening to the answers. My father admitted he hadn't understood technology and had let that ignorance become dismissal. Dimitri and I developed a friendship built on mutual respect rather than assumed hierarchy. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when old patterns surfaced, when someone would say something that revealed how deeply ingrained their previous assumptions had been. But I called it out every time, and gradually, those moments became rarer. 6 months after I bought the house, my company went public. My equity, which had been theoretical wealth on paper, became very real money. I was wealthy in a way that made the house look like a modest purchase. I diversified, invested in other startups, started mentoring young women in tech who reminded me of myself at 25. I also started dating, not because I felt pressure to find a husband, but because I wanted to. I met Marcus at a tech conference in San Francisco, a software architect with kind eyes and zero interest in my family drama. We took things slow. We built something real. A year after the confrontation, I hosted Thanksgiving at my house. The whole family came. Parents, Dimitri and Natasha, Aunt Marina, cousins I barely knew. I cooked for 2 days, filling the chef's kitchen with the same Russian dishes my grandmother used to make. Before dinner, my father asked to say something. He stood at the head of the table, this man who'd never thought I'd amount to anything, and cleared his throat. "I want to apologize to my daughter," he said, looking directly at me. "I was wrong about her. I was blind to her gifts, dismissive of her path, and complicit in making her feel less than she was. Kira didn't just succeed in spite of us. She succeeded without us, which is perhaps the greater achievement. I'm grateful she's given us the chance to be part of her life again. I'm grateful she's shown us what real strength looks like." It wasn't everything. Apologies never are. But it was something. We ate together in my dining room with its view of the river, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of something rather than apart from it. That night, after everyone left, Marcus and I stood on the back deck watching the moon reflect on the water. "Do you think it was worth it?" he asked. "All of it. The work, the secrecy, the big reveal." I thought about it. "The success would have been worth it regardless," I said. "Building my career, making smart investments, becoming excellent at what I do, that has value independent of anyone's recognition. But forcing them to see me, making them confront their own blindness." I paused. Yes, that was worth it too. Not because I needed their approval, but because they needed to understand what they'd missed. Sometimes people don't learn unless you make the lesson impossible to ignore. "You're scary when you're strategic," Marcus said, but he was smiling. "I prefer the term determined." He kissed my temple. "That too." I'm not going to pretend this story has a perfect ending. My relationship with my family is better, but not healed. Maybe it never will be completely. There are still moments of tension, still echoes of old dynamics. My mother still occasionally says something that reveals she thinks my success is lucky rather than earned. My father still gives Dimitri career advice, but not me, even though my career has far surpassed his. But I've stopped needing it to be perfect. I've stopped waiting for them to fully understand or completely change. I built a life I'm proud of, not as a weapon against them, but as a foundation for myself. The fact that it also proved them wrong, that's just a bonus. I still live in the house on the river. I still drive the same old Honda, though now it's a choice rather than a necessity. I still work 70-hour weeks sometimes, not because I have to, but because I love what I do. I promoted 2 brilliant young women to senior positions last month. I invested in a startup founded by a first-generation immigrant who reminded me of myself. I'm building something that extends beyond my own success. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and the moon is bright on the water, I think about that dinner when my mother told me I'd never own a house like my brother. I think about how close I came to believing her. I think about how easy it would have been to accept their narrative about who I was and what I was capable of. But I didn't. I looked at their disappointment and decided it was data, not destiny. I took their dismissal and forged it into determination. I became undeniable, not by seeking their approval, but by building something so substantial that approval became irrelevant. That's the real revenge, I think. Not the house or the money or the moment of confrontation. The real revenge is living well. It's becoming so thoroughly, completely, undeniably yourself that other people's opinions, even family's opinions, become background noise. My name is Kira Sokolova. I'm a VP at a machine learning company. I own a house that would make most people weep with envy. I have a partner who sees me clearly and loves what he sees. I have a career that challenges me and a bank account that frees me. I built all of it from nothing, with no one's help, while the people who were supposed to believe in me were busy believing in someone else. And you know what? I don't regret any of it. Not the struggle, not the loneliness, not even the pain. Because all of it, every dismissive comment, every moment of being overlooked, every time I was made to feel less than, all of it became fuel. And I burned so bright they couldn't look away. So here's what I learned. Never let someone else's limitations define your possibilities. Never accept their narrative about who you are or what you're capable of. And never, ever underestimate the power of a woman who's been underestimated her entire life. Because we're not just capable of success, we're capable of revolution. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. It's becoming so completely, utterly, impossibly successful that everyone who doubted you has no choice but to stand in awe. That's exactly what I did. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because at the end of the day, the house was never really about the house. It was about looking in the mirror and seeing someone who refused to be invisible. Someone who took every no and turned it into fuel. Someone who decided that if her family wouldn't give her a foundation, she'd build her own from scratch and make it stronger than anything they could have given her. The only person who needs to believe in you is you. Everyone else is optional.